In the heart of Miami, where the sun beats down on concrete basketball courts like a relentless drumbeat, respect is earned through skill, not words. On one such sweltering afternoon, 17-year-old Brett Perry stood motionless at the three-point line, sweat glistening on his forehead as he watched his shot miss the rim entirely. Comment where you're watching from today, as we dive into a story about assumptions, respect, and the day a legend changed everything with a simple act of kindness. The neighborhood court at Westside Park wasn't much to look at. Chain-link fence with holes big enough to crawl through, faded lines barely visible on the cracked concrete, and rims that had long ago lost their nets. But to Brett and his friends, this court was sacred ground. A place where dreams were both built and shattered daily under the watchful eyes of palm trees swaying in the coastal breeze. "Man, that's your fifth air ball," laughed Daniel Jackson, spinning a worn basketball on his finger with practiced ease. "You shoot like my grandmother, and she's had both hips replaced." Brett wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, his Jordan sneakers, saved up for over 6 months of weekend shifts at his uncle's grocery store, scuffing against the concrete as he moved to retrieve the ball. At 6'1", Brett was tall for his age, lanky with potential that hadn't quite materialized into the basketball prowess he desperately wanted. "Whatever, man. At least I'm trying something new." "All you do is that same weak crossover move every time," Brett retorted, bouncing the ball with more force than necessary. The afternoon heat pressed down on the 5 teenagers who had gathered for their daily pickup game. Jordan Rodriguez and Kevin Smith lounged on the sidelines, sharing earbuds and scrolling through their phones, while occasionally glancing up to offer commentary or criticism. Michael Vasquez, the shortest but quickest of the group, was practicing. His handles in the corner, a perpetual motion of orange rubber against concrete. "You know what your problem is?" Daniel said, snatching the ball mid-dribble from Brett. "You spend too much time watching NBA highlights and not enough time on fundamentals. You think you're gonna dunk like Shaq without putting in the work?" Brett's face flushed, though whether from the heat or embarrassment was hard to tell. "I could dunk if I wanted to," he muttered, not meeting Daniel's eyes. "Yeah?" Daniel's eyebrows shot up in exaggerated surprise. "That would be something I'd pay to see." Brett no-hops Perry throwing it down. The others laughed, and even Michael paused his dribbling routine to join in. Brett felt the familiar sting of being the group's easiest target, the one with big dreams but mediocre results, the one who talked about basketball like he lived and breathed it, but couldn't seem to translate that passion into performance. "I'm just saying," Brett continued, his voice taking on a defensive edge, "dunking isn't everything. Shaq was dominant because he was huge, not because he had skills. Put him in today's game and he'd be exposed." Even as the words left his mouth, Brett knew he was overcompensating. Shaquille O'Neal was one of the most dominant forces basketball had ever seen. Everyone knew that. But admitting that would mean conceding Daniel's point, and Brett was tired of being at the bottom of their unspoken hierarchy. "Man, you're delusional," Jordan called from the sideline, pulling out one earbud. "Shaq would destroy today's centers. Dude was a monster." "Whatever," Brett shrugged, trying to appear casual. "I'm just saying he couldn't shoot to save his life, and his free throws. Embarrassing. I bet even I could shoot better from the line." What none of them noticed was the sleek black SUV that had pulled up alongside the court a few minutes earlier. The windows were tinted dark enough to hide the vehicle's occupants, but not so dark that the person inside couldn't clearly hear the teenagers' animated debate carrying across the empty park. "Let's settle this," Daniel said, tossing the ball to Brett with unexpected force. "You've been talking about dunking for what, 2 years now? Show us what you got, big man. Right here, right now." Brett caught the ball against his chest, feeling his heart rate quicken. He'd attempted to dunk exactly twice in his life, both times when the court was empty, both times ending with him barely grazing the bottom of the net before landing awkwardly on his ankles. The truth was, despite his height, Brett's vertical leap was average at best. He knew it, and worse, his friends knew it too. "This is stupid," Brett muttered, bouncing the ball nervously. "The rim's probably not even regulation height." "Excuses, excuses," Michael chimed in, abandoning his solitary practice to join the growing spectacle. "Just admit you can't do it, man. No shame in knowing your limitations." But there was shame, at least in Brett's mind, growing up with posters of NBA legends covering his bedroom walls, spending hours watching highlight reels instead of doing homework, saving every dollar from his part-time job for decent basketball, shoes rather than the clothes or gadgets his peers prioritized. All of it would seem pathetic if he couldn't even perform basketball's most basic, spectacular feat. "Fine," Brett said finally, squaring his shoulders. "Get out of the way." His friends exchanged glances, surprised that their teasing had actually prompted action. They cleared a path to the basket, forming a small semicircle of spectators. Brett moved to the opposite end of the court, planning to build up speed with a running start. "This should be good," Kevin snickered, pulling out his phone to record what everyone expected would be a humiliating failure. Brett took a deep breath, trying to quiet the doubt screaming in his mind. He began his approach, dribbling with more confidence than he felt, each bounce of the ball against the concrete marking another step toward potential embarrassment. As he crossed half court, he picked up speed, his long legs covering ground quickly. "You got this, Brett," called a deep, unfamiliar voice from somewhere behind the group. Brett barely registered the encouragement as he gathered himself near the free throw line, taking one final powerful dribble before cradling the ball in his large hands. He launched himself upward with everything he had, stretching his arm toward the rim in a desperate reach for glory. For a brief, electric moment, it seemed possible. Brett felt himself suspended in air, slightly longer than usual. The ball extended above his head, the rim within reach. Then gravity reasserted its authority. His fingertips brushed the bottom of the net, not even close to the rim, as he began his descent. He landed awkwardly off balance, stumbling sideways before catching himself. The silence lasted precisely 2 seconds before Daniel burst into laughter, quickly joined by the others. Jordan was laughing too hard to finish his sentence. "Pathetic," Michael supplied, shaking his head. Kevin was still recording, his phone tracking Brett's hunched posture and reddening face. "This is definitely going on Instagram." Brett felt the familiar burn of humiliation spreading from his chest to his face. He'd known this would happen, known he wasn't ready, but allowed pride to override common sense. Now he'd have to endure not just today's mockery, but the inevitable social media aftermath, where his failure would be preserved for an audience far beyond their small circle. "Let me show you how it's done," Daniel said, reaching for the ball Brett had let roll away. In his embarrassment. Before Daniel could take it, though, a massive shadow fell across the court. The boys turned toward the source, squinting against the late afternoon sun. "Mind if I join you guys for a minute?" said the same deep voice that had called out encouragement moments before. It took several seconds for the reality to register. Standing at the entrance to their rundown court, dressed in casual shorts and a t-shirt that strained against his enormous frame, was Shaquille O'Neal himself, 7'1" of basketball royalty, looking down at them with an amused expression. The teens froze in perfect comical unison. Kevin's phone slipped from his suddenly limp grip, clattering to the ground. Jordan's mouth hung open, one earbud dangling from his ear. Michael, always in motion, stood perfectly still for perhaps the first time in his life. Daniel recovered. "You're first. You're Shaq." It wasn't a question, but a statement of disbelief, as if saying the name aloud might dispel what surely must be a collective hallucination. Shaq smiled, his presence somehow even more imposing in person than on television. "Last time I checked," he said with easy humor, "I was driving by, heard some basketball talk, and thought I'd stop. Then I heard someone say I couldn't make it in today's game." All eyes turned to Brett, who looked like he wanted nothing more than for the cracked concrete beneath him to open up and swallow him whole. I didn't mean, Brett stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence under Shaq's direct gaze. But rather than anger or offense, there was only warmth and amusement in the basketball legend's expression. "Hey, everyone's entitled to their opinion," Shaq said with a casual shrug that moved mountains of muscle. "Basketball's all about the debate. Jordan or LeBron, Kobe or Wade, that's what makes the game great." He moved onto the court with surprising grace for a man of his size, each step deliberate yet fluid. The boys parted before him like the Red Sea, still too stunned to fully process what was happening. Shaq bent down a considerable distance and picked up the basketball that had rolled to a stop near the baseline. "But some things you just have to see for yourself," he continued, spinning the ball on one massive finger with effortless skill. "Like whether or not this old man can still dunk." Without another word, Shaq took 2 casual dribbles toward the basket. There was no running start, no dramatic build-up, just 2 relaxed bounces before he gathered himself and rose upward. Despite being years removed from his playing days, the power in his movement was undeniable, a force of nature disguised as a man. His massive hand gripped the ball like it was a grapefruit as he soared toward the rim. What happened next would become legend in the neighborhood, a story the boys would tell for decades to come. Shaq didn't just dunk the ball. He shattered the backboard's peace of mind with a thunderous slam that seemed to vibrate through the very foundation of the court. The ancient rim, which had withstood years of Miami weather and countless games, groaned in protest but held firm as Shaq hung from it momentarily, a skyscraper suspended in air. When he dropped back to the ground, the concrete seemed to absorb the impact of his landing with a reverent shudder. The boys remained speechless, witnessing basketball divinity in the flesh on their humble home court. "Still got a little something left," Shaq said with a grin, not even breathing hard. Brett stood motionless, mortification and awe battling for dominance in his expression. Of all the scenarios he might have imagined when he woke up this morning, being schooled by Shaquille O'Neal after insulting his legacy wasn't among them. To his surprise, Shaq approached him directly, extending the ball. "Your form's not bad," he said with unexpected gentleness. "But you're thinking too much about the result instead of the process." Brett accepted the ball with trembling hands. "I didn't really mean what I said," he managed to say. "You're one of my favorite players ever. I was just saving face." Shaq finished for him with understanding. "Been there. But here's the thing about basketball and life. It's not about never missing. It's about having the courage to keep shooting." The wisdom in these words, delivered without condescension, penetrated Brett's embarrassment. Here was one of the most dominant players in NBA history, taking time to offer encouragement rather than ridicule. "Now," Shaq continued, addressing all 5 teenagers, "I've got about 20 minutes before I need to be somewhere. Who wants some real basketball lessons?" The response was immediate and unanimous, 5 hands shooting into the air faster than a referee calling a technical foul. For the next magical 20 minutes, the legend of the court became their personal coach, breaking down fundamentals, demonstrating proper technique, and sharing stories from his illustrious career. With Brett, he was particularly attentive, showing him how to position his body for a proper jump, how to time his approach, how to use his length to his advantage. "Dunking isn't just about vertical leap," Shaq explained. "It's about technique, timing, and confidence. But most importantly, it's about putting in the work when no one's watching." As the impromptu coaching session continued, a small crowd began to gather around the court. Neighbors who had received frantic text messages from friends, passers-by who recognized the unmistakable figure dominating the small court. Children who weren't entirely sure who this giant was, but could sense they were in the presence of greatness. What started as an ordinary afternoon had transformed into something extraordinary. A moment when the gap between basketball gods and mortals momentarily closed on a humble neighborhood court. For Brett Perry, the day's embarrassment had evolved into something far more valuable, a lesson in humility, respect, and the understanding that true greatness is measured not by words or even accomplishments, but by how you lift others when you have the chance. And as the Miami sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the court, none of the teenagers realized that this was just the beginning of how Shaquille O'Neal would change their lives, especially Brett's. The following morning dawned with the surreal quality that accompanies extraordinary events. Brett Perry woke to his phone buzzing incessantly, notifications flooding in from every social media platform. For a disorienting moment, he feared Kevin had posted the video of his failed dunk attempt, but as his sleep-addled brain caught up, he realized the truth was far more incredible. The videos circulating showed not his embarrassment, but his redemption. Shaquille O'Neal, basketball legend, coaching Brett on their neighborhood court. Most clips focused on Shaq's thunderous dunk and the impromptu training session that followed, but a few captured something even more significant, the moment near the end of their time together when Shaq had stood behind Brett, guiding his positioning. "End approach. Remember what I told you?" Shaq's voice boomed in the video, his massive hands adjusting Brett's stance. "It's all about the angle of your approach and the timing of your jump. You've got the height, you just need the technique." In the final seconds of the most shared clip, Brett made another attempt at a dunk. Though he still didn't succeed, he came noticeably closer than before, his fingertips grazing the rim instead of just the net. The improvement, though modest, was undeniable. Brett scrolled through the comments with increasing disbelief. Is that Shaq at Westside Park? Brett Perry about to become the next basketball sensation? Imagine getting personal coaching from the Diesel himself. His phone rang, cutting through his daze. It was Daniel Jackson. "Dude, we're famous," Daniel exclaimed without preamble. "That video Kevin took has like 50,000 views already. Channel 7 called my mom asking if they could interview us for the evening news." Brett sat up in bed, trying to process this information. "What? Why would they want to interview us? Are you serious? Shaquille O'Neal shows up at a random court in Miami to coach some kids, and you're wondering why it's news? Get dressed. A man. We're meeting at the court in an hour. Everyone's going to be there." "Everyone? Who's everyone?" Everyone, Daniel emphasized. "Half the school's coming. Coach Mendez from the varsity team. Even Principal Gallagher texted Jordan's dad asking for details." Brett ran a hand through his sleep-tousled hair, trying to ground himself in reality. "This is insane." "It gets better," Daniel continued, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Shaq posted about us on his Instagram. He didn't tag us because he probably doesn't know our handles, but he wrote something about great kids with potential in Miami and how he's planning something special for us." "Planning something special?" Brett repeated, now fully awake. "What does that mean?" "No idea, but I'm dying to find out. 1 hour, Brett. Don't be late." After hanging up, Brett moved through his morning routine in a state of suspended disbelief. His mother, April Martin, was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast with the morning news playing on their small countertop television. Basketball legend Shaquille O'Neal was spotted yesterday at Westside Park in Miami, giving impromptu basketball lessons to local teenagers. The news anchor was saying as footage of Shaq dunking on their court played on screen. The heartwarming encounter has gone viral overnight, with many praising O'Neal's generosity with his time and expertise. April turned as Brett entered, her expression a mixture of amazement and maternal pride. "Were you going to tell me about this, or did I have to find out from Channel 7 that a basketball Hall of Famer was coaching my son?" "I was going to tell you," Brett said, reaching for the orange juice. "It just didn't seem real. I still can't believe it happened. "Well, believe it," she replied, sliding a plate of eggs toward him. "Your Uncle Kyle called this morning, said he's getting calls from customers asking if he's related to that Brett Perry who was with Shaq. You're a local celebrity." Brett picked at his breakfast, appetite diminished by the swirling thoughts in his head. "Everyone's meeting at the court in an hour." "I'm not surprised," April said, watching her son carefully. "But Brett, remember, fame, even the 15-minute, unkind, can change how people treat you. Some of that's good, some not so much. Just stay grounded, okay?" Brett nodded, grateful for his mother's steady perspective. April had raised him alone since his father left when Brett was 7, working double shifts as a nurse to provide for them. Her wisdom, earned through years of navigating life's challenges, was something Brett had come to rely on. "I will," he promised. "It's just basketball." But as Brett arrived at Westside Park 50 minutes later, it became clear that it wasn't just anything anymore. The normally quiet court was buzzing with activity. At least 30 teenagers milled around, many of whom Brett recognized from school but had never spoken to. A few adults stood on the periphery, including Coach Mendez, who was deep in conversation with Jordan Rodriguez and Kevin Smith. "Brett!" Michael Vasquez spotted him first, jogging over with uncharacteristic excitement. "Man, you're trending on Twitter. Not just locally, nationally." Brett adjusted his backpack awkwardly, unsure how to respond to his newfound notoriety. "It's not really about me, it's about Shaq." "Don't sell yourself short," came a voice from behind. Brett turned to see Alejandra Santiago, captain of the girls' varsity basketball team, and, in Brett's carefully concealed opinion, the most talented player in their school. With her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and standing nearly as tall as Brett himself, Alejandra carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth on and off the court. "Shaq could have just done his dunk and left," she continued, appraising Brett with newfound interest. "But he spent the most time with you. That means he saw something." Before Brett could formulate a response that wouldn't make him sound completely starstruck, both by Shaq's attention and now Alejandra's, Daniel arrived, slapping him on the back with enough force to make him stumble. "There he is, the man of the hour." Daniel was practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you see? ESPN posted the clip on their social media. ESPN, Brett." The next hour passed in a blur of recounting yesterday's events, demonstrating what Shaq had taught them and basking in their unexpected popularity. Brett found himself at the center of attention, a novel and not entirely comfortable position for someone accustomed to blending into the background. Coach Mendez eventually approached, him clipboard in hand as always. "Perry, right? You've never tried out for the team." It wasn't a question, but Brett answered anyway. "No, sir, I didn't think I was good enough." Mendez studied him with the calculating gaze of someone used to evaluating athletic potential. "Tryouts for next season are in September. I expect to see you there." As the morning progressed, the crowd gradually thinned, people returning to their weekend routines with the satisfaction of having been close to something momentarily extraordinary. By noon, only the original 5 remained, along with Alejandra, who had stayed to shoot around with them, another unprecedented development in Brett's suddenly shifting world. "So what do you think Shaq meant about planning something special?" Jordan asked as they passed the ball around in a casual game of knockout. "Probably just being nice," Brett replied, trying to temper his own hopes. "He probably says stuff like that all the time." "I don't know," Michael mused, dribbling between his legs with practiced ease. He seemed pretty impressed with this court. Called it old school and authentic. "That's just a polite way of saying it's a dump," Kevin said with a laugh. "Either way," Daniel interjected, "yesterday was epic. Even if nothing else happens, we got to play ball with Shaquille O'Neal. That's a story we'll tell forever." Brett nodded in agreement, though a part of him couldn't help wondering if there might be more to come. Shaq had seemed genuinely interested in their development, offering specific advice tailored to each of their playing styles. That level of engagement suggested more than just a passing interaction. As if summoned by their conversation, a sleek black SUV, the same one from yesterday, pulled up alongside the court. The teens froze, basketball momentarily forgotten, as they watched the tinted window lower to reveal not Shaq himself, but a professionally dressed woman with a tablet in hand. "Brett Perry?" she called, consulting her device. Brett stepped forward hesitantly. "That's me. My name is Melissa Cooper. I'm Mr. O'Neill's personal assistant," she explained, her tone efficient but friendly. "He asked me to deliver this to you and your friends." She extended an envelope through the window. Brett accepted it with a mixture of confusion and anticipation, aware of his friends crowding around him to see. "What is it?" Jordan asked, trying to peer over Brett's shoulder. With slightly trembling fingers, Brett opened the envelope to find 6 embossed cards inside. He read the top one silently, his eyes widening with each word. "They're VIP tickets to the charity basketball game at American Airlines Arena next weekend," he announced, his voice barely above a whisper. "Courtside seats. And..." He paused, reading further, "passes for a private training session with Shaq and some other NBA players before the game." The group erupted in exclamations of disbelief and excitement. Melissa Cooper watched their reaction with a knowing smile. "Mr. O'Neill was impressed with your passion for the game," she explained. "Particularly yours, Brett. He mentioned that he sees potential in you that reminds him of himself at your age, not in playing style, obviously, but in determination." Brett stood speechless, the ticket clutched in his hand like a winning lottery number. "There's more," Melissa continued. The charity game is raising money for neighborhood court renovations across Miami. Mr. O'Neill would like to include West Side Park in the program if that's something your community would be interested in." The implications of her words slowly registered. Their rundown court, the one with broken chain links and faded lines, the one they loved despite its flaws, could be transformed. "Is this for real?" Daniel asked, voicing the collective disbelief. "Very real," Melissa confirmed. Mr. O'Neill believes that great basketball players can come from anywhere, but having decent facilities helps. He'd like you all to speak at the event about what basketball means to your community." As Melissa provided additional details about the upcoming event, Brett felt something shifting inside him, a new sense of responsibility mingled with possibility. Yesterday, he had been just another teenager with hoop dreams bigger than his abilities. Today, he stood at the threshold of an opportunity that could change not just his life, but the lives of everyone who played on their beloved court. What began as an embarrassing moment and a chance encounter was evolving into something far more significant. A story about how legends are made not just through personal achievement, but through lifting others up along the way. And for Brett Perry, it was becoming clear that his journey was just beginning. The week leading up to the charity game passed in a surreal blur for Brett and his friends. Word of Shaq's interest in West Side Park spread throughout the neighborhood, with the speed and force of a fast break, transforming their status from ordinary teenagers to local ambassadors overnight. Community meetings were hastily organized in the recreation center adjacent to the court, with residents young and old gathering to discuss the potential renovation. "I've been watching games on that court for 30 years, declared George Schultz, a retired postal worker and longtime neighborhood fixture. "Started when my son played there, continued when my grandson did. Never thought I'd see it get the attention it deserves." Brett sat quietly during these meetings, overwhelmed by the responsibility suddenly thrust upon him. As the one Shaq had singled out, he'd become the unofficial spokesperson for the group, a role he neither sought nor felt qualified to fill. Yet each time he considered stepping back, he remembered Shaq's words about courage and perseverance. On Wednesday afternoon, 3 days before the charity event, Brett was shooting free throws alone when Alejandra Santiago approached, dressed in practice gear and carrying her own basketball. "Heard you've been here every day since the weekend," she said, dropping her bag on the sideline. "Mind if I join?" Brett shrugged with feigned casualness, though his suddenly erratic heartbeat betrayed him. Free country. They practiced in companionable silence for several minutes, the rhythmic sound of bouncing balls and swishing nets creating a peaceful harmony. Brett found himself hyper-aware of Alejandra's flawless shooting form, elbow-aligned, follow-through perfect, results consistent. He'd admired her play from afar for years, but had never had the courage to approach her. "You know," Alejandra said finally, retrieving her ball from under the basket, "I used to come here before they built the indoor court at the community center. My dad would bring me at sunrise, said the best players practice when everyone else is sleeping." Brett nodded, unsure where she was going with this. "This court matters to a lot of people," she continued, "not just because Shaq showed up, but because of what it represents. For some kids in this neighborhood, it's the only place. They feel they belong." "I know," Brett said quietly. "That's why I can't mess this up." Alejandra stopped dribbling and fixed him with an appraising look. "Is that what you're worried about, messing up? Wouldn't you be? We're supposed to give a speech in front of hundreds of people, including actual NBA players. What if I say something stupid? What if they realize Shaq made a mistake focusing on me?" The fears that had been churning inside Brett all week finally spilled out. He hadn't voiced these concerns to his friends, who were riding high on excitement, or to his mother, who was already working extra shifts to afford a new shirt for him to wear to the event. To his surprise, Alejandra laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine amusement. "Brett, do you think Shaquille O'Neal, one of the most dominant basketball players ever, 4-time NBA champion, doesn't know talent when he sees it?" "But that's just it. I'm not talented," Brett protested. "I can't even dunk. Neither could Steve Nash, and he won MVP twice." Alejandra bounced her ball to him unexpectedly. "Look, basketball isn't just about physical gifts. It's about heart, intelligence, and work ethic. Shaq saw something in you worth investing in. Maybe it's time you saw it too." Before Brett could respond, Daniel and the others arrived, bringing with them their usual chaotic energy. The moment of connection with Alejandra dissolved, but her words lingered in Brett's mind as they began their daily pickup game. That evening, Brett sat at the kitchen table with his mother, working on his speech for the charity event. April Martin watched her son with quiet pride as he crossed out lines and rewrote sentences, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You don't need to make it perfect," she said gently. "Just speak from your heart." Brett looked up, his expression troubled. "But that's the problem. I don't know what my heart is saying. Everyone's treating me like I'm special because Shaq talked to me, but I'm the same person I was before. I still can't dunk. I still haven't made the school team. What right do I have to speak for our community?" April reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Brett, sometimes opportunities come not because we've earned them, but because we're meant to grow into them. This isn't about who you were, it's about who you're becoming." He considered her words, finding in them a perspective he hadn't considered. Perhaps this wasn't about being worthy of the attention, but about using it for something meaningful. "I just don't want to let everyone down," he admitted. "The only way you'll let anyone down is if you don't try," she replied, with the straightforward wisdom that had guided them through many challenges. "Remember what happened when you were 9 and refused to perform in the school play because you were afraid of forgetting your lines?" Brett groaned at the memory. "You made me do it anyway." And I remembered every line," he conceded. "But this is different. This is bigger." "The stage is bigger," April agreed. "But you're bigger too." Saturday, Morning arrived with the weight of expectation. Brett woke before his alarm, stomach knotted with anticipation. He checked his phone to find encouraging messages from his friends, all expressing variations of excitement and nervous energy. The most surprising text came from Alejandra. "Remember, it's just basketball. The rest is noise. See you there." This simple words calmed him more than he would have expected. By the time Brett and his mother arrived at the American Airlines Arena, home of Miami's professional basketball team, he felt a tentative confidence building within him. The arena staff directed them to a private entrance where Melissa Cooper waited with clipboard in hand. "Perfect timing," she greeted them. "The others are already inside. We'll be starting the private training session in 20 minutes. She led them through corridors normally inaccessible to the public, past signed, memorabilia and larger-than-life photographs of basketball legends. Brett tried to maintain his composure while internally marveling at being in this hallowed space. When they entered the main court, Brett froze. The arena was empty of spectators, but on the gleaming hardwood stood not only Shaquille O'Neal, but 3 other NBA players, along with Daniel, Jordan, Michael, Kevin, and Alejandra, all looking equally awestruck. "There he is," Shaq called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. The man with the speech. Brett approached on unsteady legs, hyper-aware of his mother watching proudly from the sideline. Up close, the professional players seemed even more imposing than they did on television, living monuments to athletic excellence. "Mr. O'Neal," Brett began formally, extending his hand. "Thank you for inviting us," Shaq laughed, enveloping Brett's hand in his massive palm. "First rule of today, call me Shaq. Second rule, this is about having fun while learning, no pressure." But there was pressure. Brett could feel it in the expectant gazes of his friends, in the professional cameras being set up along the sidelines to document the event for promotional materials, in the knowledge that in a few hours, this empty arena would be filled with people waiting to hear him speak. The training session began with basic drills, the NBA players demonstrating techniques while providing personalized feedback. Despite his nerves, Brett found himself fully present in each moment, absorbing every correction and suggestion with intense focus. During a water break, Shaq pulled Brett aside. "You're thinking too much again," he observed. "I can see it in your movements." "Sorry," Brett replied automatically. "I just want to get it right." "There is no right in basketball. There's only effective or ineffective," Shaq corrected him. "That's what I was trying to show you that first day. You're so worried about looking good that you're not focused on being good." The distinction struck Brett forcefully. How much of his basketball journey had been shaped by fear of embarrassment rather than love of improvement? "For this next drill," Shaq continued, "I want you to fail." "What?" "You heard me. I want you to try something so difficult that you're guaranteed to fail. And then I want you to do it again and again until failing doesn't scare you anymore." Brett considered this unconventional advice. "What should I try?" Shaq's eyes twinkled with mischief. "How about that dunk you've been chasing?" The mere suggestion sent anxiety coursing through Brett's system. "Here, in front of everyone?" "Especially in front of everyone," Shaq confirmed, "because when you finally get it, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, you'll want witnesses." With that, Shaq called everyone together for the next segment of training. "We're going to work on finishing at the rim," he announced. "Brett's going to demonstrate his current dunk attempt, and then we'll break down how to improve it." Brett shot Shaq a panicked look, but the basketball legend merely smiled encouragingly. "Remember, fail gloriously." Taking a deep breath, Brett moved to the far end of the court. The assembled group, his friends, the NBA players, his mother, the event staff, all watched with varying degrees of curiosity. In that moment, Brett made a decision. If he was going to fail, he would indeed do it gloriously. He began his approach with more determination than technique, driving hard toward the basket with the ball secured in his right hand. As he neared the free throw line, he gathered himself, focusing on the advice Shaq had given him about timing and approach angle. Brett leapt with everything he had, arm extended toward the rim, fingers stretched to their limit. For a suspended moment, it seemed possible. The rim was there, almost within reach. Then, as physics demanded, his upward momentum ceased, and he began to descend, the ball still clutched in his hand, the dunk unachieved. He landed awkwardly but managed to stay upright, turning to face what he expected would be amusement or pity. Instead, he found Shaq nodding approvingly. "Good effort. Now let's break it down." Shaq approached, motioning for the others to gather round. "First, your approach is too straight on. You want to come in at a slight angle to generate momentum." He demonstrated with a few steps. "Second, your timing is off, you're jumping too early. And third, you're not using your left arm effectively to create lift." What followed was a masterclass in dunking fundamentals, with each NBA player contributing insights from their own experience. Brett attempted the dunk 5 more times, each effort slightly better than the last, though still unsuccessful. Rather than feeling embarrassed, however, he found himself energized by the incremental improvements and the supportive environment. By the time the training session concluded, Brett had forgotten about his anxiety regarding the speech. He was sweaty, slightly sore, and more at peace with himself than he'd been in months. The pursuit of improvement had temporarily displaced the fear of judgment. As they prepared to leave the court for lunch before the main event, Shaq pulled Brett aside once more. "How do you feel?" he asked. Brett considered the question seriously. "Like I've been looking at everything wrong. I've been so focused on the result that I missed the process." Shaq nodded, satisfied. "That's the real lesson here. The dunk will come when it comes, but the journey to get there, that's where the growth happens." "Thank you," Brett said, the words inadequate for the gratitude he felt. Not just for the basketball advice, but for everything else. "One more thing," Shaq said, his expression growing serious. "That speech you're giving later, forget about trying to sound impressive. Just tell your truth, why this court matters. To you, what basketball has taught you, that's what people need to hear." As Brett rejoined his friends for lunch, he felt a newfound clarity about the task ahead. His mother was right. This wasn't about who he had been, but who he was becoming. And Alejandra was right too. At its core, this was just basketball. The rest was noise. The afternoon passed quickly, and soon the arena began filling with spectators for the charity game. Brett and his friends were given a private room to prepare, each provided with special t-shirts bearing the logo of Shaq's Foundation and Westside Park printed on the back. "You nervous?" Daniel asked, adjusting his shirt for the 5th time. Brett considered the question. Not anymore, he realized, somewhat surprised by his own answer. "You?" "Terrified," Daniel admitted with a shaky laugh. "But excited too." A production assistant appeared at the door. "5 minutes until you're up," she informed them. "You'll be introduced after the welcome address, before the players come out." The friends gathered in a tight circle, an instinctive huddle formed from years of playing together. "Whatever happens out there," Brett said, looking at each of them in turn, "we're representing everyone who's ever played on our court. Let's make them proud." They placed their hands in the center, a team in the truest sense, bound not by uniform or official roster, but by shared experience and mutual respect. "Westside on 3, Brett called. 1, 2, 3, Westside!" they shouted in unison, their voices melding into a single, powerful declaration of belonging. As they walked out into the bright lights of the arena, greeted by the cheers of thousands, Brett Perry understood that sometimes the most profound victories happen far from the scoreboard, in moments of courage, connection, and unexpected opportunity. The journey that had begun with an embarrassing failed dunk attempt had led him here, not to personal glory, but to the chance to give something meaningful back to the community that had shaped him. And as he stepped up to the microphone, the words of his speech no longer felt rehearsed, but deeply felt, ready to flow from a place of newfound authenticity. The arena lights were blinding as Brett approached the microphone, the vastness of the crowd momentarily overwhelming him. Thousands of faces looked expectantly toward the small group of teenagers from Westside Park, ordinary kids suddenly thrust into an extraordinary spotlight. Brett felt a momentary surge of panic, his carefully prepared speech suddenly evaporating from his mind. Then, from the corner of his eye, he caught sight of Shaq, giving him a subtle nod of encouragement. On his other side, Alejandra stood tall and confident, her presence steadying. His mother, April, watched from the front row, pride illuminating her features. In that moment, Brett found his voice. "My name is Brett Perry," he began, his words echoing throughout the massive space. "A week ago, I was just another kid playing on a broken-down court in Miami, talking bigger than my game." A ripple of knowing laughter spread through the audience. "I told my friends that Shaquille O'Neal couldn't make it in today's NBA," Brett continued, shaking his head at his own audacity. "And somehow, the basketball gods arranged for him to overhear me saying it." More laughter followed, louder this time. In the front row, Shaq's unmistakable boom joined the chorus. What happened next changed everything, not just for me, but for all of us at Westside Park. Brett gestured to his friends standing beside him. Shaq could have embarrassed me, he could have put me in my place and moved on. Instead, he took the time to teach us, to show us what it really means to be great. Brett paused, gathering his thoughts. When he continued, his voice had gained strength and conviction. Westside Park isn't much to look at. The concrete is cracked. The lines are faded. The rims don't have nets most of the time. But for kids in our neighborhood, it's everything. It's where we dream. It's where we compete. It's where we learn that falling down isn't failure, giving up is. The arena had grown silent, the audience captivated by the unexpected eloquence of this lanky teenager. Basketball courts like ours exist in every city, in every neighborhood. They might not produce NBA superstars every time, but they produce something just as important: community. A place where kids can belong, where they can challenge themselves, where they can grow. Brett turned slightly, acknowledging his friends, who stood behind him. "Daniel Jackson has been playing at Westside since he was 5 years old. He's the best player among us, but he's never had proper coaching." Brett pointed to his friend, who straightened his posture at the recognition. "Michael Vasquez practices his handles every single day, using techniques he learns from YouTube because there's no one to teach him in person." Michael gave a small wave, his perpetual energy momentarily channeled into stillness. Jordan Rodriguez and Kevin Smith organized neighborhood tournaments with no budget, no prizes, just pride on the line. The two friends nodded in acknowledgement. "And Alejandra Santiago," Brett's voice softened slightly, "captain of our school's girls' varsity team, comes to our court on weekends to practice with us because talent recognizes no gender barriers." In basketball, Alejandra's eyes widened slightly at being included, a smile breaking across her face. "We're just a few of the hundreds of kids who've found purpose and possibility on that court," Brett continued. "What Shaq is doing with this charity event, renovating courts like ours, isn't just about basketball. It's about giving kids a safe place to dream, to fail, to try again, and sometimes to soar." Brett took a deep breath, approaching his conclusion. "A week ago, I couldn't dunk. Today, I still can't dunk." This drew another wave of laughter. "But Shaq taught me something more important than how to get above the rim. He taught me that greatness isn't measured by highlights. It's measured by how you lift others when you have the chance." Brett looked directly at Shaq now, his voice steady and sincere. "On behalf of every kid who's ever played at Westside Park and every kid who will play there in the future, thank you for seeing us. Thank you for believing that our court and our dreams are worth investing in." The applause began before Brett's final words had fully resonated through the arena. It built like a wave, surging from polite acknowledgement to thunderous appreciation. Brett stepped back from the microphone, momentarily dazed by the response. His friends surrounded him immediately, clapping him on the back and shoulders with expressions of amazement. "Dude, when did you learn to speak like that?" Jordan whispered. "Incredulously, I just said what I felt," Brett replied, still processing what had just happened. As they moved off the court to make way for the player introductions, Brett found himself face to face with Shaq once more. "That," the basketball legend said simply, "is exactly why I stopped at your court that day." He placed a massive hand on Brett's shoulder. "You've got something special, young man, and it has nothing to do with dunking." The charity game that followed was a dazzling display of basketball artistry, with current and former NBA players showcasing their skills while keeping the atmosphere light and entertaining. The teenagers from West Side watched from courtside seats, absorbing every move, every technique, every moment of sportsmanship and showmanship. During halftime, the event organizers revealed architectural renderings of the planned renovations for West Side Park. The images displayed on the arena's massive screens showed a transformed space with new surfacing, professional-grade hoops, proper lighting for evening play, and covered bleachers for spectators. "We're not just fixing courts," Shaq announced to the crowd. "We're building community centers that happen to have hoops. Every kid deserves a safe place to play, to grow, to belong." Additional funds were raised through auctions and direct donations throughout the event. By the game's conclusion, the foundation had exceeded its financial goal, ensuring that Westside Park and 5 other neighborhood courts would receive complete renovations. As the arena began to empty, Brett and his friends found themselves in a surreal moment, taking photos with NBA players, receiving signed memorabilia, being treated not as fans, but as valued partners in something meaningful. "Construction at West Side will begin next month," Melissa Cooper informed them as they prepared to leave. "Mr. O'Neill would like you all to be involved in the planning process to ensure the renovations meet the community's needs." "Us?" Kevin asked incredulously. "Why would he want our input?" "Because you know that court better than anyone," she replied matter-of-factly. "You understand what works and what doesn't, what's missing and what's essential." The significance of this trust was not lost on Brett. They were being viewed not as charity recipients, but as stakeholders, their perspectives valued and their insights sought. As they exited the arena into the warm Miami evening, Brett found himself walking alongside Alejandra, slightly separated from the others who were animatedly reliving highlights from the game. "Your speech was amazing," she said quietly. "You didn't just represent the court, you represented all of us. Perfectly." Brett felt a flush of pleasure at her words. "Thanks for being there. I don't think I could have done it without seeing you standing beside me." The admission slipped out before he could censor it, more vulnerable than he'd intended. To his relief, Alejandra didn't seem put off by his candor. "That's what teammates do," she replied with a small smile. "They show up for each other." "Is that what we are now? Teammates?" Brett asked, heart racing slightly. "Well, we're both representing West Side in this project, aren't we?" Her answer was pragmatic, but delivered with a warmth that suggested multiple layers of meaning. Before Brett could respond, Daniel called out to them. "Hey, we're thinking of going to Antonio's Pizza to celebrate. You two coming?" Brett looked at Alejandra questioningly. She nodded, and together they rejoined the group, their circle expanding naturally to include her. The celebration at Antonio's extended late into the evening, with parents joining in as the teenagers recounted every detail of their extraordinary day. The small pizzeria buzzed with excitement and possibility, the West Side Park renovation becoming a symbol of unexpected opportunities and community pride. As the night wound down, Brett stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The Miami skyline glittered in the distance, a constellation of human ambition and achievement. He thought about how much had changed in just 1 week, not just for the court or the neighborhood, but within himself. The door opened behind him, and his mother April joined him in the warm night air. "Penny, for your thoughts," she said, leaning against the wall beside him. "I was just thinking about what Shaq said about greatness," Brett replied, "about how it's measured by lifting others when you have the chance." April nodded thoughtfully. He would know something about that. "I've always thought about basketball as my way to stand out, to be special," Brett continued. "But maybe it's really about connection, about being part of something bigger than yourself." "That sounds like wisdom to me," his mother said softly. "And it has nothing to do with whether you can dunk or not," Brett laughed, "though I still want to learn how." "Of course you do," she replied with a knowing smile. "And you will. But now you understand it's not the end goal, it's just part of the journey." The following Monday, Brett returned to school with a strange new status. Word of the charity event had spread throughout Miami, with local news coverage featuring clips of his speech and interviews with Shaq about the West Side Park renovation. Teachers who had barely noticed him before now greeted him by name in the hallways. Students who had never spoken to him suddenly wanted to hear first-hand accounts of what it was like to meet NBA players. In his English class, Mrs. Chelsea Johnson used Brett's speech as an example of effective public speaking. "Notice how he connected personal experience with universal themes," she explained to the class. "That's what makes communication resonate with an audience." Brett sank lower in his seat, uncomfortable with the attention, yet secretly pleased that his words had made an impact. At lunch, he found himself invited to sit with the basketball teams. Both boys and girls varsity players gathered at one table, with Alejandra making space beside her for Brett to join. "Coach Mendez wants to talk to you after school," she informed him between bites of her sandwich. "I think he's reconsidering waiting until September for tryouts." Brett's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Seriously, mid-season? Turns out having Shaquille O'Neal personally vouch for your potential carries some weight," she replied with a grin. After school, Brett met with Coach Mendez in the gym. The conversation was brief, but life-changing. "Perry, I'm not offering you a spot on varsity," the coach began bluntly. "You're not there yet, technically." Brett nodded, trying to hide his disappointment despite Alejandra's warning. "However," Mendez continued, "I am offering you a training position. You'll practice with the team, work with our conditioning coach, and develop your skills in a structured environment. By next season, if you put in the work, you could be varsity material." It wasn't a spot on the team, but it was a doorway, an opportunity Brett wouldn't have dreamed possible a week earlier. "Thank you, coach," he said earnestly. "I won't let you down." "See that you don't," Mendez replied, then surprised Brett with what almost resembled a smile. "And when you finally get that dunk, I want to be the first to know." The weeks that followed took on a new rhythm for Brett. School, basketball training, planning meetings for the West Side Park renovation, and daily practice sessions with his friends filled his days with purpose and direction. The court that had once been merely a backdrop to their teenage lives had become the centerpiece of something transformative. 1 month after the charity event, construction officially began at West Side Park. The community gathered for a groundbreaking ceremony, with Shaq himself returning to Miami to turn the first shovelful of earth. Local businesses contributed additional resources, landscaping services, security lighting, even a mural to be painted on the new backboards by a renowned Miami artist. As summer approached, Brett's progress under Coach Mendez's training program showed measurable results. His vertical leap had improved by 3 inches. His shooting form had been refined for greater consistency. His understanding of game strategy had deepened beyond simple mechanics to encompass the chess-like complexity of basketball at higher levels. And then, on a warm evening in late May, it happened. Brett was at Westside with Daniel, Michael, Jordan, Kevin, and Alejandra. Construction was nearly complete, with the new court surface cured and the professional-grade hoops installed just days earlier. They had special permission to be the first to play on the renovated court before the official reopening ceremony. Scheduled for the following weekend, Brett had been practicing a specific dunk approach for weeks, following Shaq's detailed instructions about angle, timing, and the use of his non-dominant arm for lift. He had come close several times, but had yet to successfully complete the move. As the golden light of sunset bathed the new court in a warm glow, Brett decided to try once more. His friends fell silent, recognizing the determination in his expression. Alejandra, who had become both friend and something more in the intervening weeks, gave him an encouraging nod. Brett started his approach from the perfect angle Shaq had demonstrated, building momentum with each powerful dribble. His timing, the aspect he had struggled with most, felt synchronized with his movement for perhaps the first time. As he gathered himself for the leap, he focused not on the outcome, but on the process, on the mechanics that had become second nature through hundreds of repetitions. His left arm swung upward, creating the counterbalance Shaq had emphasized. His right arm extended the ball toward the rim with confidence rather than hope. And then, in a moment that seemed to extend beyond its physical duration, Brett Perry was airborne, rising higher than he ever had before. The sensation of his hand clearing the rim came with a shock of disbelief. The ball passed through the new net with a satisfying swish, and Brett landed on both feet, solid and centered. For a heartbeat, silence hung in the air. Then eruption, his friends rushing toward him with shouts of triumph and celebration. Daniel lifted him off the ground in a bear hug. Michael was jumping so energetically he could barely stay in one place. Jordan and Kevin were recording the moment on their phones, already planning its social media debut. And Alejandra simply stood before him with a smile that reflected his own amazement back at him. "I knew you could do it," she said, just loudly enough for him to hear over the commotion. In that perfect moment, on the threshold of a summer filled with possibility, Brett understood what Shaq had been trying to teach him all along. The dunk wasn't the achievement, it was merely the visible manifestation of something far more significant. The real victory lay in perseverance, in community, in the willingness to fail publicly on the path to growth. As the sun set on the renovated Westside Park, casting long shadows across the pristine surface where generations of Miami youth would now play, Brett Perry looked around at his friends, his team, and recognized that some journeys matter, not because of where they lead, but because of how they transform you along the way. And somewhere across the country, Shaquille O'Neal would soon receive a video of a lanky teenager from Miami achieving his first dunk on a court that now stood as a monument to possibility. Proof that sometimes the greatest assist comes not from a fellow player, but from a legend who recognizes that his most important legacy isn't counted in championships, but in lives changed by a moment of unexpected kindness.